Hello, we'll come here in Genesis chapter 33, and we're going to begin here when Jacob meets his brother Esau. It begins in verse 1. It says, "And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with 400 men, and he divided the children unto Leah, and unto Rachel, and unto the two handmaids." Now, Jacob is now seeing his brother coming with 400 men, and here he divided the bands, and he divided them with Rachel, Leah, and the two handmaids. And the two handmaids are Bilhah and Zilpah, as we see. And he says in verse 2, "And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindmost." And here he put those children, he put the handmaids and the children first. And then he put Leah's children, Leah and her children, and then put Rachel and Joseph. Here you see a bit favoritism coming from Jacob. Here he puts those closer to his heart in the hindmost, in the back, because here he loved Rachel and he loved Joseph, and he put them all in the back, but the rest of them he just put them in the front, because he was thinking about if Esau comes and smite one company, as he mentioned before, then the rest of them will escape. But here he puts his closest ones that he loved dearly closer to him. And it says in verse 3, "And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." And as Jacob passed over, and he passes over these people coming, these bands of men coming, 400 men, and he will bow his head down continuously until he reaches to his brother. And all these tactics, that he played, it didn't work. God already softened this man's heart, and here God already softened Esau's heart. And, God alone is not, within our own self, all this cleverness that Jacob has portrayed. He think he's going to soften his brother's heart, but he just pretending to do all these things. But here, we're going to see that his brother did not accept all these, tactics, all these droves he put in front. And he says, "And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him." You see, he thought Esau would be mad, but here Esau ran and meet him and fell on his face and fell on his neck and kissed him. You see, this Esau, after 20 years, God has already softened Esau's heart. After 20 years, and he thought that Esau would be angry with him, but here Esau came and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And he says, "And he said, Who are those with thee?" And he said, "The children which God hath graciously given thy servant." Then the handmaids came near, and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near, and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. You see? And here you see that Esau, he ran and meet his brother head on, and he kissed him, and they wept. And Esau said, "Who are these children?" And Jacob said, "These are the children that God has given me." You see, all Jacob's family came here and they bow to Esau. And you see, Esau never served Jacob, as the prophecy when the prophecy was read that the elder will serve the younger, it's not talking about the individual person. It's talking about in the nation, the future, when they become nations here. And it's talking about the generations of Esau will serve Jacob. See, God is not speaking in terms of individual. So, and then they came here and they bow. And then in verse 9 it says, and he said, what meanest thou all these drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. See, all these things does not work. Esau is already, came and hugged his brother and embraced him genuinely. So all these things did not work. And then in verse 9 he says, and Esau said, I have enough, my brother, keep thou hast unto thyself. In other words, he says, I have enough. I don't need it. Despite all Jacob's plans. Because his brother came and said, what does all these things mean? All these droves that I see. And he said, it's to find grace in your sight. But God is already softened Esau's heart. After 20 years, God is the one that softened this man's heart in order for Jacob to return back to Canaan. And when God called Jacob, when he was out in the far country, he told him to come back to your father's land. You see, that because when God calls somebody, it means that God has already prepared the way. And here, God has already softened the heart of Esau to meet Jacob. And this Jacob, all he did was spend all night worrying, planning tricks after tricks, trying to, appease his brother with gifts. But it didn't work because God has already done the work. You see, it wasn't about gifts. You see, Esau missed his brother, and he missed his brother Jacob. And all night Jacob was in distress, and he separated two bands, two after two, and then put droves of gifts and to soften his brother. But and then he did also took his family in the middle of the night and to cross the brook. And then here all these things he did, spending all time, it didn't work. It's just like us, we can spend many times worrying. Nothing happens when we worry. You see, God says, do not worry. God has taken care. God says, well, what are you gonna? How? No worrying can add any cubit to you. You see, and God has already done it. You see, God softened all these things, made preparation, and Esau was just pleased to see his brother here. You see, for years, and that's what happened. And the lesson here is that if you just let God deal with your fears and conflicts, we wouldn't need to go through all these troubles and troubles. See, Jacob, all he had to do is just believe God, and everything would have been fine. And then he says in verse 10, he says, and Jacob said, nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face as I have seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God had dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. See, now Jacob now begged his brother Esau to take all these droves that he has put in place, and he urged him to take it. And it would have been an insult if Esau would have rejected the gift, you see. But here he didn't want to insult his brother, so he took it. And it says here in verse 12, which he says, and he said, let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, speaking of Jacob, saying to Esau, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. He's just making also an excuse because he doesn't want to go with his brother. And, Esau told him, let us take our journey and I will go before you. And Jacob says that, he's using this as an excuse. He said the children are young. And rightfully so, they are young. They are young children. And at this time, they were young children, you know. And he says, and so are the flocks. He concerned that the flocks will die. And he's saying, he says, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me. And the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord unto Seir. See? And he says, and Esau said, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And he said, what needed it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. See, seems that Jacob had this injury, that is preventing him to move faster. If you remember, he had tussle with the angel of the Lord. Now, this angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnated Christ, and he had a tussle with him all night. He said he wrestled with this angel, and when the angel could not prevail, he touched the hollow of the thigh of Jacob and dislocated it. And this man is now in pain, and he's not walking fully as he should, because God is the God that sometimes will break us down and to rebuild us. But here you have this man is now, have this ailment, and he's walking, and he's not as it seems like he's not moving as fast as he once were. Because Jacob was a sprinter. He will connive his way and then he ran. But now he seems like he's slowing down. He says, Jacob says, I will lead softly. He said, because he's walking slowly. He said, keep going. Now he uses his children as an excuse, but he says that I will walk as slow as the children walk. And also, I don't think he wanted to go to Mount Seir because, may also be afraid of Esau. He said, what if my brother is not genuine? You see, and that's what guilt conscience always happen. When we face these guilty conscience, we feel like, we don't really fully gonna trust the grace of people giving to us or the grace of God. And when we read on more, when Joseph's brother, in the past, and I'm moving ahead, when Joseph forgave his brother still, all his brothers were still having guilt ridden. But again, this is the next, after this chapter, we're going to look at Joseph, Jacob's son, later on, but we're going to look at, about the brothers that, deal with how he dealt with his brothers and how he redeemed his brother and came to, reconciliation with his brother. But he's still, despite that, his brothers were still not trusting the grace that was given to them. And that's what happened here with Esau and Jacob. Esau has given Jacob the grace, but Jacob don't seem like he's trusting that grace because he's still guilt ridden. And in verse 15, he says, Esau offered to leave the gods with him. He said, let me leave the gods with Jacob to protect him, protect the family, And Jacob, he said he didn't need Esau's gods. Overall, Esau was a typical decent and noble man. And he's one of the man's man. You will see, when we look at, in the Bible, he's a man's man. He was a very athletic man. He was a very, he meant well in everything he did. He meant well, but the problem is that he didn't have any aptitude of godly things. He had no room for God. And there are people who are, very typical, decent individuals. They have everything all together in their life. They are kind of people you would want to hang around with. But when you look at them, they have no capacity for the things of God. And that's what Esau is. That's what he was. He was not, he had no tolerance for godly things, for God. And he make no room for God. And this is what God will later on speak in the nation. He says in Malachi, it says, Jacob I love, Esau I hate. See, he's speaking about the nation. It's not in the individual, but this individual became a nation. The way he was is how the nations became. And he's the father of the Edomites. And the Edomites they took on the nature of their father. And they had no room for God. So, beginning here, we continue on in verse 16. It says, So Esau returned that day on his way to Mount Seir. You see, he went to Mount Seir. He didn't go to Canaan, because Canaan represents the presence of God, where God is. But this man is, again, he does not want to be around God. He doesn't want to be among godly people. So he took all his wives and everything and he left. And he says, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built him an house and made booths for his for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Sukkot. Now Esau returned to Mount Seir that day. And that was the last we heard and we're going to see about Esau. The encounter with Esau with Jacob. That was the last encounter. He's going to encounter with Jacob. And we're going to continue more on Jacob now. But Esau is now just moving on out of scripture. And then we're going to talk about Esau later on. But it says here, and Jacob went to Sukkot. And here you see again Jacob going to Sukkot, and he's heading in the wrong place. Remember, God called him to go to Bethel. When God called him out of Pandanaram, so he told him to go to Bethel, to the place where you anointed the pillar. God identified with Jacob in Bethel. And here, this man is now journeying, and he stopped here in Sukkot. And again, injury may have made an effect on him. He may have been, lingering with this injury. But here, he stopped here. It says, and Jacob came to Salam, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. And he came from Pandanera and pitched his tent before the city. Now you see, whenever he says this word, pitched his tent before the city, that's always sounds bad in the Word of God. And it says here he came to Shechem and pitched his tent, and it's not always good to do that. And it's just like when saying that we pitched a Christian, who pitched his tent with the world. And you see, when we're going to look at what happened with we see what happened with Lot when he pitched his tent in Sodom. But we're going to see more about what happened with Jacob when Jacob is going to pitch his tent in this city called Shechem. And verse 19 says, and he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent. Now he spread his tent in this place that God did not tell him to go. And now he says, and he bought a parcel of a field where he spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Now he bought this parcel of field from the children of Hamor, and this is Shechem's father, 100 pieces of silver. Now this city of Shechem is also later on Joseph's bones is going to be buried here, and we're going to see that in Joshua 24 verse 32. But now Jacob will have to have this conflict with his children of Hamor. And this is where he's going to have a conflict because now he didn't go to the right place where God wanted him to go. And then in verse 20 it says, and he erected there an altar and called it Elo ye Israel. See, he called this place, he erected an altar and called it Elo ye Israel, means God, the God of Israel. See, this is not the right place he's supposed to be doing this. He was supposed to go to Bethel, and now he's coming into this place. He's erecting this altar and he's calling the name of God, that God is ordaining it. God is not in this part. And this man is now, you know, an altar at Shechem. He's put this altar at Shechem and he said, God of Israel is distinct and separated. Again, the word Elo ye Yisrael means God, the God of Israel. It means that God is the God of Israel and he's distant and distinct and separated himself from other false god of the world. This is God. This is what it means. And again, this was not the right place to erect this altar. You know, he could have erected it in Bethel, but here this is not the right place. And God told him to go to Bethel, where he's supposed to meet God. And disobedience will eventually got Jacob in a lot of trouble, and we're going to see that. But here, this man is finally a redeemed man. He came to meet with his angel, and he said this angel redeemed him. That's Christ. He's redemption of Jacob. See? And we're going to see more about this Jacob later on, what happened with him in this place called Shechem. Until then, precious saints, God bless.